Sherlock Holmes, The Final Problem and Other Stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The Adventure of the Dancing Man. Sherlock Holmes had been sitting for some hours in silence doing chemical experiments. "So, Watson," he said suddenly, "you want to invest your money in these gold fields in South Africa?" I looked at him with surprise. "How on earth do you know that?" It was not really difficult to infer it from what you did yesterday. He told me how he had guessed my plans. "How simple," I cried. "Quite so," he said. "Every problem becomes very childish once it is explained to you. Here is an unexplained one. See what you can make out of that, friend Watson." He showed me a sheet of paper with strange hieroglyphs on it. "Why, Holmes, it's a child's drawing," I cried. "Oh, that's your idea. What else can it be?" "Oh, that's what Mr. Hilton Cobbett of Ridingthorpe Manor, Norfolk, would like to know. He sent it to me by post, and he is coming by the first train today." "Oh, there's a ring at the door. It's probably Mr. Cobbett." A tall, clean-shaven gentleman entered the room. He was going to sit down when he saw the paper which I had left on the table. "Well, Mr. Holmes, what do you make of it?" he asked. "They told me you were fond of mysteries. I sent you the paper so that you might have time to study it before I came." "Well, it is certainly rather a curious drawing. It consists of little figures dancing across the paper. But why does such a childish thing worry you?" "It doesn't worry me, but it worries my wife. She says nothing, but I can see fear in her eyes." Holmes held up the paper so that the sunlight shone fully upon it. The drawing was made in pencil. "This promises to be a most interesting case," said Holmes. "You gave me a few particulars in your letter, Mr. Cobbett, but would you kindly tell us more about it now?" "I'm not much a storyteller," said our visitor. "Just ask me anything that I don't make clear. I'll begin at the time of my marriage last year, but I want to say first that, though I'm not a rich man, my people have been living at Ridingthorpe for more than 5 centuries, and there's no better known family in Norfolk. Last year I came up to London for a few weeks, and I stopped at a hotel in Russell Square. There was an American lady there. Her name was Elsie Patrick. We became friends, and soon I was as much in love with her as a man could be. We were quietly married in London, and we returned to Norfolk. You'll think it's strange, Mr. Holmes, that a man of a good old family should marry a wife in this way, knowing nothing of her past and of her people. But if you saw and knew her, it would help you to understand." Elsie was quite frank with me. "I'd rather never speak about my past," because it is very painful to me," she told me. "If you take me, Hilton, you will take a woman who has nothing that she need be ashamed of. But you must believe my word and never ask me any questions." I agreed to it, and I have never asked her anything. Well, we have been married for a year now, and we have been very happy. But a month ago, our troubles began. My wife got a letter from America. I saw the American stamp. She turned white as she read the letter, and then threw it into the fire. She didn't speak about it afterwards. But she has never known an easy hour from then on. There's always a look of fear upon her face, a look as if she were waiting and expecting. Well, now I come to the strangest part of my story. About a week ago, it was the Tuesday of last week, I found on one of the window sills a number of little dancing figures like these on the paper. They were drawn with chalk. I thought it was the stable boy who had drawn them, but he said he knew nothing about it. Anyhow, they had come there during the night. I ordered the boy to wash them off, and I told my wife about it afterwards. To my surprise, she took it very seriously and asked me to let her see them if any more drawings came. None came for a week, and then yesterday morning I found this paper in the garden. When I showed it to Elsie, she fainted. Then I wrote and sent the paper to you, Mr. Holmes. I couldn't take it to the police because they would laugh at me. But you will tell me what to do. I'm not a rich man, but I would spend my last penny to save my wife. He was a fine man, simple and gentle. His love for his wife shone in his eyes. Holmes listened to his story with great attention and sat for some time in silence. "Don't you think, Mr. Cobbett," he said at last, "that the best plan would be to ask your wife to tell you her secret?" Mr. Cobbett shook his head. "A promise is a promise, Mr. Holmes. If Elsie wished to tell me, she would. If not, I can't force her." "Then I will help you with all my heart. I will suggest that you return to Norfolk and that you take an exact copy of any new dancing man which may appear. See also if there are any strangers in the neighborhood. Then come to me again." This interview left Holmes very thoughtful. He often took the paper from his notebook and looked at the curious figures on it. 2 weeks later, Mr. Cobbett came to us again. He was looking worried and depressed. "It is getting on my nerves, this business, Mr. Holmes," he said. "And it's just killing my wife gradually." "But have you found anything?" "A great deal, Mr. Holmes. I have several fresh pictures of dancing men for you to examine, and what is more important, I have seen the fellow." "What? The man who draws them?" "Yes, I saw him at his work. But I will tell you everything in order. When I got back after my visit to you, the first thing I saw next morning was a new picture of dancing men. They had been drawn in chalk on the black wooden door of the tool shed. I took an exact copy of it, and here it is. He put the paper on the table. Here is a copy of the hieroglyphs. Excellent, said Holmes. Excellent, please continue. 2 mornings later, a fresh inscription appeared. I have a copy of it here. 3 days later, I found another paper on the sundial. Here it is. The figures are, as you see, exactly the same as in the last one. After that, I decided to lie in wait, so I got out my revolver and sat by the window in my study. About 2 in the morning, my wife entered the room. She asked me to come to bed. I told her I wished to see who it was who drew these figures. She answered that it was some kind of joke, and that I should not take any notice of it. Come to bed, she said, and we can discuss it in the morning. Suddenly, as she spoke, I saw her white face grow even whiter, and I felt her hand on my shoulder. Something was moving near the tool shed. I wanted to rush out, but my wife threw her arms round me and stopped me. At last, I managed to open the door, but it was too late. Before I reached the tool shed, the fellow had gone leaving this paper. In the morning, I found some more of his pictures on the door. Have you got that fresh drawing? Yes, it is very short, but I made a copy of it, and here it is. The new dance was in this form. Tell me, said Holmes, much excited, was this an addition to the first picture, or did it appear to be quite separate? It was on a different part of the door. Excellent. This is the most important for all of us. Now, Mr. Cabot, how long can you stay in London? I must go back today. I will not leave my wife alone all night for anything. She is very nervous and begged me to come back. You're right. Leave me these papers, then, and I think I shall be able to pay you a visit shortly and throw some light upon the case. When our visitor had left us, Holmes rushed to the table and put all the pictures in front of him. For 2 hours, I watched him as he wrote some letters and figures on a sheet of paper. He was so busy that he forgot my presence. Finally, he jumped up from his chair with a cry of pleasure. Then he wrote a long telegram. He waited for 2 days, but there was some delay and he did not get an answer. On the evening of the 2nd day, there came a letter from Mr. Cabot. He had sent a copy of a long inscription which had appeared that morning. Holmes looked at it for some minutes and exclaimed, "We have waited long enough. Is there a train to North Walsham tonight?" I looked at the timetable. The last train had just gone. "Then we shall take the first in the morning," said Holmes. Miss Hudson, Holmes' landlady, opened the door. She was holding a telegram in her hand. "Oh, here is the telegram we have been expecting," cried my friend. "One moment, Miss Hudson. There may be an answer. No, that is quite as I expected. This telegram makes it all the more necessary for us to go." We arrived at North Walsham and asked the way to Ridingthorpe Manor. The station master hurried to us. "I suppose that you are the detectives from London," he said. Holmes was angry. "What makes you think such a thing?" "Because Inspector Martin from Norwich has just passed through. But perhaps you are the doctors. She is not dead. You may yet be in time to save her." "We are going to Ridingthorpe Manor," said Holmes. "But we have heard nothing of what has happened there." "It's a terrible business," said the station master. "They have been shot, both Mr. Hilton Cubbit and his wife. She shot him and then herself. So the servants say. Dear, dear, one of the oldest families in Norfolk, and one of the most honored." Without a word, Holmes hurried to a carriage, and during the long 7 miles drive, he never opened his mouth. He was lost in gloomy thought. When we got out of the carriage, a little man came quickly to us. It was Inspector Martin. He was surprised when he heard the name of my companion. "Why, Mr. Holmes, how could you hear so soon of the crime?" "I expected it, and I came to prevent it." "Then you must know more than we do. Mr. and Miss Cubbit were said to love each other very much." "I have only the evidence of the dancing men," said Holmes, "but I'll explain it to you later. It is too late to prevent the tragedy, but I want to help the police do justice." Inspector Martin allowed my friend to do as he wished. The doctor had just come down from Miss Cubbit's room and said that her injuries were very serious, but that she would not die from them. She was still unconscious. Holmes asked him if she had been shot or if she had shot herself, but he could not give any decided answer. The doctor was certain that the bullet had been fired at a very short distance. There had been only one revolver in the room, and 2 bullets had been fired. Mr. Cubbit had been shot through the heart, but it was also possible that he had shot her and then himself. "How long have you been here, doctor?" asked Holmes. "Since 4 o'clock. "Who sent for you?" "The servants." "Then I think we had better hear their story at once." The 2 women told their story clearly enough. They had heard a shot at 8, which was followed a minute later by a second one. They had rushed out of their rooms and together ran downstairs. The corridor and the room were full of smoke and the smell of powder. The door of the study was open and the candle was burning on the table. Mr. Cubbit lay in the middle of the room. He was dead. His wife lay near the window. She was moving. Her face was red with blood. The window was shut. Both women were sure of that. They sent for a doctor and for the police. Then they took Miss Cubbit to her room. Nothing had been moved in the study. So far as they knew, Miss Cubbit never quarreled with her husband. The servants thought that they loved each other very much. Holmes then went to the study and examined very carefully. The body of Mr. Cubbit and all the things which were in the room. I don't suppose it is possible to see the bullet which injured the lady? He asked the doctor. A serious operation will be necessary for that, but there are still 4 bullets in the revolver. 2 have been fired and 2 people shot. Perhaps you can also explain where the bullet which struck the window came from? Holmes pointed to a small hole in the window pane. "Dear me!" cried the inspector. "How did you see that?" "Because I looked for it." "You're right," said the doctor. "Then certainly a third person was present. But who could that be?" "That is the problem which we are now about to solve," said Sherlock Holmes. "You remember that the servant said there was the smell of powder in the whole house? This shows that at the time of firing, the window as well as the door of the room was open. Smoke cannot be blown so quickly through the house if the windows are closed. So the windows were open, but they were open only for a short time." "How do you know that?" "Because the candle wasn't guttered." "I suppose then," continued Holmes, "that there was a third person who stood outside. Any shot fired at this person might have hit the window. I looked and there was the bullet mark. But who shut the window? The woman's first instinct would be to shut the window. But what is that?" It was a lady's handbag which stood on the table. There were 20 50-pound notes in it. "You must keep this for trial," said Holmes as he gave this bag to the inspector. "Now, we should try to throw some light on this third bullet which has been fired from inside the room. Let's have a look at the garden now." There were large footmarks in the grass and flower beds. Suddenly, Holmes picked up something from the grass. "Here is the third bullet," he exclaimed. "I really think, Inspector Martin, that our case is almost complete. Now I would like to know if there is any place called Elridge in the neighborhood." None of the servants had heard of such a place, but the stable boy knew of a farmer by that name. Holmes thought for a little and then told the boy to take a horse and ride to this farmer. He took the pictures of the dancing man from his pocket. He worked for some time at the study table. Finally, he handed a letter to the boy and asked him to give it to the farmer. It was addressed to Mr. Abe Slaney, Elridge Farm, East Rowston, Norfolk. "I think, Inspector," said Holmes, "that you would do well to telegraph for an escort, because you may have a dangerous prisoner to take to town." When the boy had gone, Sherlock Holmes gave his instructions to the servants. If any visitor asked for Miss Cobbett, no information should be given about her, but he was to be shown in at once. Finally, he said that we could do nothing but wait. The doctor went to see his patients, and only the inspector and myself remained. Holmes sat down at the table and put the drawings of the dancing man on it. "Now, I'll explain to you the mystery of these figures. First of all he told the inspector about Mr. Cabot's visits to Baker Street. I have here in front of me these strange drawings at which one might smile if they hadn't brought about such a tragedy. I know all forms of secret writings, but this one was quite new to me. However, when I discovered that the symbols stood for letters, the solution was easy enough. He was soon able to read all the messages. He told us how he had guessed what letters were represented by which pictures. One message said, "Am here, Abe Slaney." Holmes knew that Slaney was an American, because Abe is an American name. He then sent a telegram to the New York police station asking if Abe Slaney was known to them. The answer was, "A most dangerous rascal." On the very evening when this answer came, Mr. Cabot had sent his last message, in which Slaney had asked Elsie to meet him. "I came at once to Norfolk with my friend Watson," said Holmes, "but only to find that the worst had happened." "Excuse me, Mr. Holmes," said the inspector, "but if this Abe Slaney is indeed the murderer, he will certainly try to escape now." "You needn't be uneasy. He will not escape. I expect him here at any moment. If I am not mistaken, here is the gentleman now." The door opened and the man came in. Holmes quickly put a revolver to his head, and the inspector came with the handcuffs. The fellow looked surprised and suddenly burst into laughter. "Ha ha 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 ha! Well, gentlemen," the man said, "you have caught me this time. But I came here in answer to a letter from Miss Cabot. Don't tell me that she is in this too?" "Miss Cabot is seriously injured." The man gave a cry of despair. "It was he who was injured, not she. Who would have injured little Elsie says that she is not injured. She was found seriously injured at the side of her dead husband." For 5 minutes the man was silent, and then he spoke again. "I have nothing to hide from you. If I shot the man, he had his shot at me first, and there is no murder in it. But don't think I injured that woman. I tell you, there was never a man in this world who loved a woman more than I loved her. She was engaged to me years ago. Who was this Englishman that he should come between us?" "She ran away from you when she found out the kind of man you are," said Holmes. "She went to England and married an honest man. But you followed her and made her unhappy. You wanted her to leave her husband, whom she loved, and to run away with you, and you brought the death of a good man and the suicide of his wife. You will answer for it in law. If Elsie dies, I may die as well. But if she is as bad as you say, who wrote this letter?" He threw it on the table. "I wrote it to bring you here." "You wrote it?" There was no one outside our gang who knew the secret of the dancing man. How could you have written it? What one man can invent, another can discover. You will now go to prison, Mr. Slaney, but there is one thing you can do for Miss Cabot. You can make it clear to the whole world that she is in no way responsible for her husband's death. "I ask nothing better," said the American. "First of all, I want you gentlemen to understand that I have known this lady since she was a child. There were 7 of us in a gang in Chicago, and Elsie's father was our boss. He was a clever man. He invented that writing. Well, Elsie could not stand this business and she got away to London. She had been engaged to me and she would have married me if I had taken some honest job. It was only after her marriage to this Englishman that I found out where she was. I wrote to her but got no answer. So I came over and stayed at that farm. As letters were of no use, I put my messages where she could find them. Once she wrote me an answer, under one of them asking me to go away. She came down and brought some money with her. This made me angry and I tried to pull her through the window. At that moment, her husband rushed in with a revolver in his hand. He fired, but he didn't hit me. I fired almost at the same time and shot him. As I ran away, I heard the window shut behind me. And I heard no more about it until the boy came with a letter today. While the American was talking, 2 policemen arrived in a cab. Inspector Martin stood up and touched the prisoner on the shoulder. "It is time for us to go." "Can I see her first?" "No, she is unconscious." "Mr. Holmes, I only hope that if I ever have an important case, you will be so kind as to help me again." We stood at the window and watched the cab drive away.